The night my husband lost everything, he walked onto the stage as if nothing in the world could touch him. We were in a hotel ballroom in Manhattan, chandeliers burning above a sea of black suits and sequined dresses. Donors and board members turned toward the spotlight while cameras waited at the back. He stood in the center of that light, smiling like the city belonged to him. The MC called him a visionary developer, a generous philanthropist, a devoted family man, and the applause came easily. For years, people had loved that story, and I had helped keep it intact. My name is Olivia Carter, 34, creative director for the events that keep men like Daniel polished and untouchable. I design the flowers, the lighting, the angles where cameras catch his best side, and I am supposed to exist just beyond the frame. That night, I had no intention of staying there. They brought me on stage as the elegant wife who always stood behind her husband's success. Daniel took the microphone and turned me into a soft joke, the woman who made everything pretty while he handled the serious business. The room laughed, and I smiled for the cameras while my jaw locked. A few hours earlier, I had been alone in my office, staring at budgets and photos that did not match the story on stage. The charity numbers were wrong in ways too deliberate to be mistakes. Event costs bloated, and invoices routed through shell companies that led back to Daniel. In another folder, shots from a private retreat showed him with a younger woman pressed against him, his hand on her waist, like there was no wife at home at all. Her name was Brooke Miller, and she was not just a colleague. The man praising donors for their generosity had been quietly diverting their money and sharing hotel rooms with someone who was not his wife. It was a double betrayal of our marriage and of every person who believed his speeches. I did not confront him when I saw those files. I saved them, backed them up, and forwarded a select few to my friend Jasmine Reed, a divorce attorney who has watched rich men pretend the rules do not apply to them. Then I went back to my mood boards, letting my anger cool into something patient. By the time the gala night arrived, patience had turned into a plan. A small USB drive with the right clips and documents was already loaded into the presentation system, sitting behind the polished logo and uplifting music. The betrayal that once felt like a private wound had become a path toward something else, the truth in front of everyone who mattered to him. So when Daniel used me as a convenient joke again, I did not hear the room the way he did. I watched the donors, the journalists, the board members who had tied their reputations to his name, and I felt the balance of power tilt. Even if only I knew it. The man in the spotlight believed the next segment would secure his legend for another year. In the ladies' room, away from the glare of chandeliers, I stared at the woman in the mirror. The gown, the polished hair, the flawless makeup belonged to the role I had been playing. But my eyes were steady in a way they had never been before. I thought of my mother begging a man with Daniel's same easy smile not to leave. When I walked back toward the ballroom, I knew this night would not protect my husband's reputation. It would end it. It started with a photo I was never meant to see. The photographer had sent me the event folder late. A last-minute change request for the gala decor. As I clicked through images of centerpieces and sponsor logos, one file didn't match the rest. There they were, Daniel and Brooke. Close in a way no business relationship could explain. Her red dress stood out against the private event backdrop, his hand low on her back like he owned her. They weren't posing for the camera, just caught in a moment of quiet possession. One I instantly recognized. That same hand used to rest on my waist when we were still pretending. I stared at the image longer than I should have, but I didn't delete it. A few days later, Daniel left his laptop open in the kitchen, distracted by a call. A message preview from Brooke flashed across the screen, asking whether he'd told me yet. I screenshotted it without flinching. Saving it next to the photos, something sharp settled in my chest. Not heartbreak, just clarity. I didn't confront him. I didn't throw things, or cry, or beg him to choose me. Instead, I copied everything to a secure drive and called Jasmine Reed. She wasn't just my friend, she was one of the most capable divorce attorneys in Manhattan. When I told Jasmine what I had, she didn't gasp or console me. She asked for timestamps and file metadata. She reminded me that anger fades, but evidence doesn't. And she warned me that if I ever decided to go public, I'd need more than just infidelity. That's when I started looking at the budget files. As creative director, I had access to every line item for the gala and the fundraising arm of Daniel's housing nonprofit. I knew the cost of uplighting, floral installments, venue insurance numbers etched into my mind after years of managing perfection. So when a lighting invoice doubled without explanation and a catering expense referenced a vendor I'd never hired, I noticed. I told them the footage was real. I said the video was mine. I said that if they ever truly cared about where their money went, they should start asking questions tonight. Then I stepped off the stage and left him standing in the spotlight alone. Jasmine reviewed the files I sent over and told me exactly what I needed to do. Collect more. Secure everything on an external drive. Do not access Daniel's personal accounts. Only use what I had legal access to through my role, so it could hold up under scrutiny if needed. For weeks, I smiled through meetings, placed floral orders, and collected evidence. I listened when Daniel bragged about public support and watched Brooke sit 3 rows back at our press events. Always just out of frame, I moved through our home like a ghost, memorizing schedules, planning in silence. There would be 3 stages to his downfall. The first would be social expose the man behind the smile in the one space he valued most, his public image. The second would be reputational, make sure the media got the full picture, not the cropped version. And the third would be legal, force him to deal with the consequences of every signature he thought no one would notice. The gala was the perfect stage. It would be filled with board members, city officials, donors who saw Daniel as the future of ethical development. A night meant to raise funds and elevate his legacy would instead become the first unraveling thread. I arranged for a trusted AV tech to upload a presentation with a single embedded file switch. A USB drive labeled innocuously sat in my purse for 3 days before the event. My job gave me access to every screen, every light, every second of timing. I just had to make sure he didn't see it coming. On the day of the gala, I sent Ava to stay with a friend overnight. I told her we'd do pancakes in the morning. She was the only reason I waited this long. The only thing that made me hesitate. That night, I stood at the edge of the ballroom, dress pressed, smile rehearsed, USB already in place. He was about to walk into a room built to worship him, unaware it would become the place where his mask shattered. I wasn't just his wife anymore. I had become his reckoning. Daniel moved through the ballroom like a man untouchable. He shook hands with board members, paused for photos with donors, and wore the kind of smile people mistake for sincerity. Brooke was there too, standing 3 steps behind him in a champagne-colored dress, introduced as a creative consultant. No one blinked. She blended in exactly as intended. I watched it all from across the room, unseen and deliberate. Every laugh, every compliment aimed his way landed on the illusion I was about to dismantle. I had rehearsed this night down to the second. The only thing left was to let it run its course. The schedule unfolded exactly as planned. The wine flowed. The speeches began, and Daniel was positioned near the stage with a glass of scotch and a face made for camera flashes. I stood near the tech booth, nodding to the AV assistant I trusted with the switch. In 5 minutes, the program would move into the video segment Daniel had personally approved. He believed it was a tribute reel about the housing initiative, filled with warm testimonials and elegant B-roll. He had approved the first half of the video weeks ago and never questioned the file since. What he didn't know was that 10 seconds after the opening credits, the real footage would begin. I had made sure the audio would be unmistakable. The lights dimmed, and the room went quiet in anticipation. The screen glowed with the logo of the Carter Foundation, music swelling with perfect emotional manipulation. It showed images of families receiving keys to new apartments, volunteers in matching shirts, and Daniel standing with city officials, shaking hands. The first 30 seconds were exactly what he expected. Then, without transition, the tone shifted. The footage jumped to an overhead angle of a hotel suite hallway, Daniel and Brooke walking out, laughing, his hand sliding across her waist. Another clip followed, Brooke in his lap, both of them unaware of the security camera overhead. The room had gone completely silent. What followed was worse. A voice recording played next, one I had found in a forwarded voicemail Daniel never deleted. He laughed while telling someone the foundation's expense reports were flexible and joked that housing projects make great PR cover when you want to move money quietly. There were no gasps, no murmurs, just silence so sharp it rang. I stood at the side of the room, watching the backs of heads turn slightly toward Daniel, waiting to see how he would react. His glass was frozen mid-air. Brooke stepped back like distance might erase what had just played. Patricia, his mother, had gone pale beneath her pearls. Daniel barked something to the AV team, but the video continued for another 10 seconds. Just long enough to display a spreadsheet with figures circled in red, costs inflated 3 times over. Vendor names matching his shell company. The screen finally went black. The silence unbroken. For once, Daniel had no script. I stepped forward before he could spin it. My heels echoed against the marble as I walked toward the stage. No longer in the background. My hands didn't shake. I took the microphone and addressed the room with the same calm I had used to build every event he ever stood on. I told them the footage was real. I said the video was mine. I said that if they ever truly cared about where their money went, they should start asking questions tonight. Then I stepped off the stage and left him standing in the spotlight alone. The first wave came just after midnight. Someone had recorded the entire moment, the video. Daniel's frozen expression, the sudden silence in the ballroom, and posted it to a local social media account. Within an hour, it was being shared across platforms with captions ranging from disbelief to pure outrage. By sunrise, the footage had been clipped, subtitled, and stitched into commentary videos by creators who didn't even know his name yesterday. I watched it unfold from a hotel room across the city, sipping black coffee in the dark while my phone buzzed every few seconds. News alerts, missed calls, texts from people I hadn't heard from in years. None of it felt real yet. But the view count didn't lie, and neither did the tone of the headlines. I stepped forward before he could spin it. My heels echoed against the marble as I walked toward the stage. No longer in the background. My hands didn't shake. I took the microphone and addressed the room with the same calm I had used to build every event he ever stood on. By noon, 2 major donors had released official statements, distancing themselves from the Carter Foundation. One of them demanded a formal audit. The gala's board suspended all future fund allocations pending an internal investigation. Daniel, for the first time in his career, was on the defensive. I cross-referenced documents, tracing payments funneled through a consulting firm registered under a shell corporation. That shell belonged to Daniel. Money meant for transitional housing programs was being redirected into his private development projects, under the guise of event management fees. It was elegant, polished, and completely rotten. The more he spoke, the worse it got. Comment sections flooded with disbelief. Then anger. Journalists began digging into his past filings, pulling numbers from previous years, and finding patterns that no one had noticed before. It wasn't just one event, it was a system of quiet, Sophisticated redirection. Brooke Miller, the woman who had stood at his side during so many of those events, became collateral damage almost immediately. Brands she partnered with began suspending deals, citing clauses about public conduct and moral standards. Her social media pages were overwhelmed with accusations and insults, people calling her everything from complicit to clueless. She disabled comments by noon and went silent. Some defended her, saying Daniel had manipulated her, promised her more than he intended to deliver. Others pointed out how often she appeared in the margins of press photos, always just close enough to matter. Whatever the truth, Brooke's image fractured overnight, and no filter could repair it. Meanwhile, Patricia Carter, Daniel's mother, was receiving her own share of fallout. The social circles she had ruled for decades now whispered behind her back. At a brunch the following weekend, she arrived to find 3 of her closest allies had canceled last minute. Her name was no longer a symbol of grace, it was a punchline. Back at the legal level, Jasmine and I moved swiftly. We filed for divorce the morning after the gala, attaching evidence and timelines with meticulous precision. Alongside it, a motion to temporarily restrict Daniel's access to Ava was submitted, citing emotional instability and media exposure. Everything we did was clean, calculated, and above all, public record. Daniel called me once. I didn't answer. He left a message laced with rage and desperation, alternating between threats and apologies. I saved it, like I saved everything. Despite the chaos, I didn't post anything. No statements, no clarifications, no interviews. I let the facts speak, and they screamed louder than I ever could. The power of silence, when paired with truth, was more devastating than any performance. The most surreal moment came when I walked past a newsstand and saw Daniel's face on the cover of a magazine. Not for his success, but for his fall. The headline read, "The Collapse of the Carter Legacy." He had spent decades building that name into something sacred. It had unraveled in 48 hours. Then, without transition, the tone shifted. The footage jumped to an overhead angle of a hotel suite hallway, Daniel and Brooke walking out laughing, his hand sliding across her waist. Another clip followed, Brooke in his lap, both of them unaware of the security camera overhead. The room had gone completely silent. Daniel asked to meet in person 1 week after the story broke. His legal team had gone quiet. His press team had vanished. And the man who once commanded every room now requested a private sit-down. We met at a downtown office arranged by my attorney. Neutral and cold, with nothing personal in its walls. He looked thinner, worn down, like someone who hadn't slept in days but still tried to keep his tie straight. He didn't apologize, not really. He circled around words like regret and misunderstanding, trying to dress the damage in softer language. Then he made his offer. If I retracted my involvement publicly and issued a joint statement about emotional miscommunication, he'd compensate me generously and agree to a peaceful divorce. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward or shift in my seat. I simply told him that peace had already been purchased by me, with silence, patience, and a very expensive understanding of who he truly was. The moment he lied to the world and used my name as a prop, the negotiation ended. The most surreal moment came when I walked past a newsstand and saw Daniel's face on the cover of a magazine. Not for his success, but for his fall. The headline read, "The Collapse of the Carter Legacy." He had spent decades building that name into something sacred. It had unraveled in 48 hours. The court acknowledged the emotional harm, the financial manipulation, and the public fallout as factors in their decision. Daniel's legal team knew better than to let this drag on. Every day the headlines ran. His remaining business partnerships trembled a little more. For a man who had built his empire on image, Silence became his only currency. Brooke disappeared from the media almost entirely. She issued one vague statement about mental health and privacy, then vanished from every platform. Brands dropped her quietly. Without fanfare. Her name stopped trending after a week. But her reputation never quite recovered. Patricia Carter, once a name that moved invitations and opened doors, found herself slowly pushed to the margins. At first, her peers comforted her, chalking it up to a tragic family rift. But as the audits deepened and the figures turned criminal, even the most loyal socialites found reasons to distance themselves. The Carter name, once gilded, now lingered like smoke. Meanwhile, I rebuilt, slowly, deliberately, and without spectacle. I resumed work with a different agency, choosing clients and projects that didn't revolve around egos and charity facades. I no longer accepted silence as the price of proximity to power. Ava adjusted in her own way. She asked questions, and I answered them with honesty, scaled to her understanding. She knew things had changed, but she also knew she was safe. And that mattered more than anything else. We made pancakes that weekend. Like I promised. Jasmine remained my closest ally through it all. She never once pushed me to strike harder than necessary. But she always made sure I understood how to protect myself. Revenge wasn't just about punishment, it was about freedom. The kind that comes from not needing anyone to speak on your behalf ever again. Months passed, and Daniel officially resigned from all positions within the foundation and his own firm. The city moved on. The media moved on. But I didn't forget. And I didn't forgive not because I held a grudge, but because remembering kept me honest about what I had survived. None of this made me feel triumphant. It made me feel awake. For years, I'd been walking through a carefully constructed life, mouthing the words someone else had written for me. Now, every headline was written in my language. And for once, I wasn't afraid to read it. The last time I saw Daniel, he walked past me at a gallery opening we once co-hosted every spring. He didn't speak. He didn't nod. He just looked down and kept walking. That was all the closure I needed. Standing up to him didn't make me a hero. It made me whole. The life I live now isn't perfect, but it's mine. And for the first time in years, I don't flinch when someone calls my name. If you've ever questioned whether it's worth standing up for yourself when the cost feels unbearable, let this be your answer. The silence you break may be your own, and the moment you choose to speak might just be the one that sets you free.